How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Shebeen. It's Sunday night. I'm Barry Chandler. You're all very welcome wherever you're joining us from, whether it's the United States or further afield. We're going to have a bit of crack, chat, and community around our favorite Irish spirit, Irish whiskey tonight. We're going to be talking about Powers Irish whiskey. We're going to be talking about hotel stays in Ireland, sharing stories of the history of Ireland's most iconic whiskey brand, I think, and where to stay in Ireland when you're next traveling to our lovely country. I'd love to know where you are. I'd love to know what you're drinking. I'm starting off with an old drop of Powers 3 Swallow, and that'll be in my glass throughout the evening. We'll talk more about that. I'll be joined this evening by Derek King, whiskey expert and global brand ambassador for whiskey brands, and a man who knows his Powers inside out. So we'll be joined by Derek in a few minutes. But before that, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the whiskey club. We'll talk about what's in your glass, and we'll answer any questions. We've got lots of Powers in the house, judging by the comments anyway. Let me know in the comments what you've got in your glass. We've got Powers Rye all over the place. Powers 3 Swallow, lots of 3 Swallow there. Brendan McNally and Johnny McNally are in Long Beach drinking 3 Swallow. Fair play to you. Dee and Jeff in Indianapolis are in Indiana drinking Powers John's Lane. Kean's drinking 3 Swallow. Powers will be cleared off the shelves across the states today. 3 Swallow in Arizona with Amy, Powers Rye with Tom, Powers John's Lane with Jeff. It's a Powers night. You understood the assignment. Fair play to you. Fair play to you. So, what's going on in the world of Irish whiskey in the next week? There's lots going on in Ireland. We've got Whiskey Live, Ireland's largest whiskey festival and event, takes place in Dublin on Friday and Saturday next. We should expect an announcement before that on a new Redbreast Dream Cask, which will be released in conjunction with World Whiskey Day. World Whiskey Day is on May 20th, which is Saturday this year. But I expect we will have an announcement on a new Redbreast Dream Cask, which is a limited edition. Anywhere from 500 to 900 bottles have been released every year for the past, 5 years now? 4 years? 5 years, I think. And doesn't get shipped to the US, sadly, but it is available to those who have access to an Irish mobile number in Ireland and an Irish address, perhaps to ship it to. It can be, you might be lucky. It's available via ballot, but I don't have any more details on it yet, but I will share those with you when I have them. I think I'll be getting a chance to taste it later this week, so I have no details on what it is, no idea. But that's a bit of a highlight for Redbreast fans. There are many of our whiskey community traveling to Ireland for Whiskey Live in Dublin this year, so that's an exciting time to get to meet all the people you've been hearing about the rest of the year, all the brands, all the distilleries, all the distillers and blenders, everyone under one roof for 2 days, which is a great highlight of the whiskey calendar. And it's going to be a busy time and a lot of sore heads, I'd imagine, in the next week. Who else is joining us? Kristen's joining us. She's on her way to Dublin. She's going to be in Dublin next week. Veronica in New Zealand. Hi, Veronica. How's it going? I made her have a Powers whiskey sour. I didn't make you do anything. Veronica, the creator of the whole Bicky Chandler meme. Fair play to you, Veronica. Bob is finishing off a sip of the Napo Castle 1951. There's a big hitter. Fair play to you, Bob. All right. Let me see. Let me bring up some club events or club details to share with you for those of you who are members of our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. We will be announcing very soon, we hope. We're trying to get some logistics over the line, our next whiskey bottling. We've got 3 releases coming, I think, hopefully in the next 3 months. That's the goal. 3 releases in the next 3 months. If we can do it, June, July, and August, I suspect, all going to plan. If it's not going to plan, it'll be June, July, and September or thereabouts. And in any case, our next bottling, our next exclusive Whiskey Club release will be announced very shortly, and it's going to be the oldest one we've ever released. It is old enough to drink whiskey in Ireland, put it that way. So I'll share more details on that when it's ready. That's coming out very soon. What else have we got to share with you? Oh, yes. For those of you who joined us last week, you got a great taste and bit of inside information about one of Ireland's newest distilleries, Garden County Distillery in County Wicklow. That is, they're about to commission their stills over the next 2 months. And we were joined by Gavin Clifford, the co-founder, who shared some great insights and kind of personal stories of the challenges of building a distillery and funding a whiskey company, that replay is available on our website, storiesandsips.com. If you want to catch a replay with Gavin, great chat. And we tasted some nice whiskies from Gavin as well that they've sourced. And he's got a massive sourced stock of whiskies from the early days of Great Northern Distillery, which is really interesting. So that's available on our website for you to check out. In addition to that, we also have a great chat with Padraig O'Greelish, the co-founder of Mickle Distillery in Galway, famous for their poitín, legally and illicitly over the past number of years. Padraig and his family have been distilling in Connemara for many, many years, and Mark McLaughlin sat down with Padraig O'Greelish to talk about the challenges and the business of poitín, what's involved in making it and bringing poitín and whiskey to market in Galway. And it's a really interesting chat. So for those of you who are interested in the business of whiskey, we have three different The Business Of in our series, three different videos in our series with Two Stacks Irish Whiskey, with O'Connell's, WD O'Connell Whiskey Merchants, and now with Mickle Distillery. So check that out. That's on storiesandsips.com as well. All right. So tonight we're going to start off with Powers, because you're all big Powers fans. And let us know if you switch from one Powers to another, or you start sipping on a Powers tonight. We'd love to know what you're drinking. These are the four Powers in the lineup currently. But let's bring in a man to chat about them with us. And we're going to bring in none other than Mr. Derek King. Derek, how are you?
Hey, Barry. How's it going, mate? How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for joining us. You're a big fan of Powers. So that when we announced this, and you said that should be a great night, I said, geez, we can't do this without Derek.
Yeah, it always seems a good idea at the time to like send the love heart eyes or something like that on Instagram, and then all of a sudden you're, like I just said to you, you're up well past your bedtime. But for yeah, it's look, I love Powers, and I love to see, like, obviously seen in the comments and stuff like that. So many people. I think there is this love for it, and I always said that, if you touch it in any kind of format, and I was lucky enough to work very, very closely with it. I think, to see the whole rebrand and all of the rest of it with Powers and survive it. I say I always should have got a T-shirt made. I survived the rebrand because I think that was probably one of the biggest things in recent times for Powers. But it was all very enjoyable. I absolutely love it, and obviously now moved on. It belongs on every tasting mat that I ever do. I always keep the lights off John's Lane or Three Swallow there. So
tell us, Derek, a little bit about your own background. Some folks here will be very familiar with you, know you well, others not yet. Tell us about your journey in the world of Irish whiskey.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I suppose, a fresh kind of start for me. It's fairly new. I suppose the whiskey journey kind of started in Slane. I was part of the startup team that opened the Slane Distillery, kind of more the visitor experience side of things, and I was working in pubs. Pub culture for me is kind of another obsession. I just love the whole come from good Galway pub culture. I kind of dragged up in the pub on a Sunday really, and saw lots of, and I think that's where the interest peaked with the likes of whiskey and pub culture. But I was Sunday was my favorite day to work in the pub, and I was in Slane at this stage, small kind of music venue in Slane. Opened the pub and closed the pub on a Sunday. It was a great day because you got all the stories, you got the news, and you got the gossip really on a Sunday. You heard the juice from the weekend. And one local punter used to do kind of the 3 or 4 pubs in the village. So by the time he got to you at 4 p.m., he was talking absolute rubbish at this stage. But he said, listen, I've got a bit of news. He said, I know you like a drop of whiskey. He said, Jack Daniels are coming to Slane. And I kind of couldn't figure it out really. It was like, in what format? What do you mean? He said, they're coming to Slane. Jack Daniels are coming. They're going building a big distillery in Slane. So as it happened, he kind of had a few of the details maybe mixed up a tiny bit, but it was obviously Brown-Forman venturing into Irish whiskey, and they were going to invest in the castle in the old stable blocks. And as soon as I heard that, I said, you know what, I'd love to work in a distillery. I'd love to give this a shot. One thing led to another, and I got the gig, and it kind of just grew from there. So I spent a couple of years in Slane, and from there, Powers for me was kind of a dream job, really. It's I think Powers has had good advocates all the way through, even now in the lights of Carol and Eric and all these people. But to get that global brand ambassador job with Powers was, I nearly crashed the car that evening. I took that phone call. I think the worst thing about getting the Powers job was I had to leave Galway. So I was torn up about that a little bit. But 6 years later, I think it's Galway is even further away from me now, you know.
And you've of late, most recently, you've taken the experience from Slane and Powers and elsewhere, and you've gone out on your own and taken the leap, no small undertaking, to share whiskey with others. Tell us a little bit about that venture.
Yeah, so it's I suppose in any way, kind of the likes of the whiskey brands, you are tied to corporate. Let's call a spade a spade. They're all kind of, I suppose they've all got big guns behind them now, so you are part of the corporate net as such. And I think that got a bit tight on me recently. I was going away on holidays, bit stressed, bit of pressure that week and whatnot, and I had kind of, I guess I was building it in the background. So it's called Experience Irish Whiskey, and in the way I feel about it is that we're all kind of lucky to be involved in an Irish whiskey community here in Ireland that fits on your thumbnail, really. Like, it's the same faces at these really amazing tastings all the time. We get to go to the Palace Bar to taste stuff from the likes of O'Connell's. It's always very kind of the same heads in a small room, really. Yeah. And I can't help but feel that, visitors coming to Ireland for the first time, you see the numbers, like over 500,000 people are going to visit distilleries in Ireland this year. Like that's up 475 odd percent. It's a huge number. So I think what I'm trying to offer is kind of an authentic experience, really, for people to taste whiskey like Irish whiskey people do, if that makes sense. So we sit down for a couple of hours. It's all very chilled. It's 6 whiskeys over the 2-hour period, using different brands, single grain, single malt, touch on a couple of blends, and right the way through to single pot still, where I always tell people we can kind of get behind the label, really, and transparency comes to the fore. So we really kind of chat. I suppose the fact that you have some inside information as well helps, and it's those interesting things, I think, that keep people on the hook. So Powers 3 Swallow enjoys a place on most tasting mats for me as well. That's how I navigated through to pot still, but going pretty well and I'm lucky enough to have good support as well. My backdrop is always a traditional Irish pub. So the Palace Bar has been very good to me, and the Swan Bar on Ainger Street, which bit of a hidden gem as well. And I love taking groups of people in there to see the Swan. It's kind of one that's missed the beat, I think. It's on the cusp of all the visitors to the country finding out about it, and then it's going to be swamped. Right. But for now, it's pretty nice to go in there on a Tuesday afternoon with a tasting group and be the only ones in the place. It's a pretty good opportunity to see it. It's brilliant.
It's great to see. It's great to see the environment existing for a business like yours now to be able to do it. 5 years ago, you couldn't have done it, and there'd be nothing to talk about. And, exactly. And you wouldn't have the people. So it's great to see it. And we'll talk about that later on in terms of hotels as well, offering experiences. 5 years ago, the idea of an Irish whiskey experience was brilliant. Beyond just a drop of Powers at the bar, So, well, congratulations on the launch of that. And I'm looking forward to, at some point, participating in one of those tastings that you host in Dublin as well. We're going to take some of your knowledge tonight, and we're selfishly going to extract lots of your knowledge you gleaned over the years with Powers to help kind of tell us and help us tell the story of Powers tonight, because it's an iconic brand that's been part of all of our lives for as long as we've been around and for many generations before. And it's something that for some reason it connects with people in a deep way when they start to hear the family stories and the various things that the Powers family and the brand and the distillery did over the years. People find there's an unusual connection, something I don't find very often with brands. And it's probably the brand that we get asked about the most in our Facebook group, and there's the most interest in it and what's coming next. So tonight I think we'll talk about the story of it and share what's really just a dozen stories of thousands of stories that could be shared over the 230 odd years of their existence, because there's just so many of them, isn't there?
Yeah, it's great. Like it touches everywhere, really. It's funny, and I always find myself again, like I said, that kind of old style pub or whatnot. And I was in the depths of Limerick last night at an event, and found myself escaping at around 10:30 to get for a pint. There's a really, really interesting, beautiful pub in the village of Abbeyfield. It's called John Mike's. Really, really nice pub, kind of traditional, old school, no frills. And the place, all of these old iconic houses are just draped in powers, but it's all kind of I guess they're hidden on old water jugs. It's on mirrors. It's on old signage outside the door, and I love that. I love that it always sits around in the background, and it's always that kind of diamond pea that gently reminds you that they've been around for a long time. It's very special, yeah.
So to start the story, really, we have to go all the way back to the 1780s, mid 1780s. Before there was a John's Lane distillery, there was a man, James Power, and I know we see John Power on the we used to anyway see it on the bottle, didn't we, of
Yes,
whiskey? But James Power was the original Power, the innkeeper, Mr. Innkeeper Power.
Innkeeper, yeah. So that's and I remember the first time I saw this picture. It's archived in Middleton. Obviously, it was Carol that showed me. I think even poor Carol was a bit embarrassed showing this picture, the only one she has of the poor man. Like it's not really a great picture of him, to be fair. But I mean, it obviously a powerhouse in what he did, to pardon the pun. But like you mentioned, it was and similar to the pubs I mentioned as well, the Swan Bar. Like these would have always kind of been all things to all people that were arriving into Dublin. Where Powers were located, they were in what's now a real cool hipster area, obviously the Liberties in Dublin. They were immediately outside the medieval walls of the city. And this was kind of purposeful, or it was intent to, have certain liberties, if you like, being based there. And that's where Powers decided to set up their kind of, I guess, motel, bar, kind of lodgings or whatnot. And at that time, it would have been a very, very small distillery when the distillery operating would have started. And I think Powers kind of originally would have figured that it was always going to be the quality over quantity. And they were going to take it forward that, selling whiskey on the world stage and by the barrel was going to be far more lucrative than selling it by the glass to these, I guess, weary travelers coming into Dublin that were just stopping off and moving on. So that's where I suppose the story starts. It's all of this story is based around Thomas Street. It stretches from 105 all the way up to 109 on Thomas Street, and yeah, that's a beautiful picture as well. And I suppose from there that's where it grew in stature. I mean, you had what was merely a bar, and we see the stories of where it grew and grew and went to almost 8 acres over the Liberties, like stretching all the way back to the river. But the front facade is relatively unchanged. That picture you've got there, relatively unchanged. And one remarkable thing about it was obviously, everything they touched, aesthetics was always going to be important, and first impressions for them was kind of rule of the way they were going to operate. This particular street was, if you'll imagine, this is a lovely picture where it looks great. I'd imagine this was probably early on a Wednesday morning or whatnot, but this was a market street. Chickens, pigs, livestock, cereals, all of the rest of it was been traded on Thomas Street. It was traditionally a market street, and not the market street that you know today, where it would be clean and there would be people probably trying to maintain it as best they can. This would have been absolute carnage at the time. But the first job that was done in John's Lane every single morning was people were sent to clean the footpaths and the front facade of the building. And every picture we see of it, it's always so strikingly clean. It always looks remarkably clean. And they just would have made sure that this was the first impression of people, whether you were coming up there to, pay off your bill, or you were delivering, your barley up to John's Lane. One of the first jobs done, but it's still a beautiful place to pass by today. There's still a reminder there that of what it was exactly.
Sadly, that big oval kind of door there to the left, that big entrance. I don't know if you've seen it recently now. So that's like a big blue door. It says NCAD in
Yes.
stencils on it, but every morning it's just loaded up with rubbish bags. So rubbish from all the businesses around are just piling
Yeah.
up in front. It wouldn't have happened in the Powers time.
No, absolutely not. Like there's, I mean, it's skeletal now. Well, the good news is, believe it or not, and I'm not sure whether you've seen, there's a bit of stir on social media and stuff about it. So for the first time, I'd imagine in a very, very long time, the pot stills are now actually wrapped in scaffold again. So there is some work, and I can't, I don't know exactly what they're doing. They could be, they could be just taking graffiti off for all I know. But I know one thing's for sure, that for the first time, there's a bit of work been done on them. But
Okay.
still a lovely place to go and visit, though. It's still,
It
you can
is,
still
yeah.
you can still imagine it. Now it's not a, it's not a truckload of barley that's coming through the archway. It's kind of a bin lorry that might be
Yeah.
reversing in through the
Yeah,
arches,
yeah,
but you
yeah.
can still imagine what it would have been like back in the day, for sure.
And
It's a beautiful place.
this drawing here, illustration, shows the city within the city. So that first picture that we just looked at, so this black and white, so look at that archway down the bottom left, and then again look at the archway down the bottom left, because you see that now again. So that's the counting house. That building to the foreground is the counting house, and then everything behind that um, is the is Powers John's Lane Distillery. So John's Lane is down to the right. You follow the picture down to the right, and the laneway that goes down towards that first, maybe the furthest over chimney stack would be John's Lane. And what a city! Like, it had its own fire engines and fire department. It had all its coopers, malting house. Everything was done on site. A massive, sprawling, one of
Unbelievable.
the biggest distilleries in the world in the early 1800s.
Yeah, it's so the front, as you said, that was your kind of first picture, and everything was scale, really. Because when you think of John's Lane, you kind of think of innovation, you think of forward thinking, and it was all growth, it was all size, it was all scale. The numbers were massive. Like, I mean, that's all on the left hand side. It's kind of in a square, if you like the malting stores, 5 stories tall. The pot stills, the biggest around at the time. Everything was scale. It was, and again, a 24-hour operation was kind of unusual at the time as well. So you could have cooked your breakfast on the pot stills in John's Lane 24 hours a day. These things were hopping all the time. They were burning through 5 to 6 tons of coal to feed the stills daily. Like, I mean, it's incredible to think the output. So they would have taken that from that small, that small kind of business, that family business we spoke of, to a distillery that was producing 3.5 million liters of alcohol. Like, it's an incredible story. It really, really is. The
Massive.
the size of the operation. Yeah.
And this is like, this whole complex has been disseminated over the years and has been broken up, and different parts of this have been leveled and knocked down. There's other parts of it are still in existence today. It's the National College of Art and Design, which I believe itself is leaving and moving on to another location, I think, and are leaving, if I'm not mistaken, are leaving this site. I don't know if you've heard anything about that at all.
Yeah, I did. I heard some rumblings about that as well. Yeah, it's an interesting one, because in CAD, it's there's a funny divide. It's up there, and I regularly pop in, just pop down for a look, and it's always nice to put a picture up on Instagram and of the stills or whatnot. Now they're in complete disrepair, but there is some students in there that, believe it or not, have done their end of year projects and stuff, all based around Powers and where they are. But then the other huge majority of students, they kind of just sunbathe, lying against these pot stills, and they're all very artsy, and, as I said, kind of hipster, that have absolutely no idea
Yeah,
what went on in this place.
I
It's
know.
it's uh, it's pretty remarkable, really. But parts of it are so well preserved.
It's nice to think that the artisans of the 1800s were making the whiskey, and the artisans of today are making, different crafts and arts and crafts in the same building. Like, there's some level of kind of art and design and skill and craft that's still within these walls, which is a nice little kind of a through line.
Yeah, who knows what's next for? I mean, it's funny. I remember, it's kind of, it's interesting, and full well, Barry, as well, I think. they having that kind of love, and that for Powers, people are very passionate about it. Powers is ours was always that kind of expression.
I know.
And people always said, would they not just take back NCAD and, bring it back to a working distillery again? And I always just said to people, have you been there? Have you seen what it would take to bring this back to it? It'll never happen unless there's, someone has a come to Jesus moment and decides to pump millions into it. But it's
I know.
yeah, there's parts of it I love up there, and then the trees growing around the stills and stuff is a bit disappointing at times. But however,
even today, you wouldn't be able to bring a grain lorry down John's. You wouldn't be able to turn the corner down John's Lane with the lorries, I'd say, to make deliveries.
No, and it's interesting because when you see some of the old imagery, and there's loads online, obviously, I even find myself kind of going back over old articles to read some of the kind of the takes, and there's pictures that we've seen that kind of almost show the navigation away from John's Lane, because the streets became too narrow. We see there's one particular picture of John's Lane, and you can see where the tram tracks have been laid outside.
Oh yeah.
And ironically, there's one of the horse-drawn Powers carriages in the background. And that was kind of a sad divide, because you can see where, okay, that was, the time that was, and now we're moving towards kind of the city logistically was not going to be able to put up with, I guess, the vision of what was going to happen in a greenfield site in Middleton and Cork, I guess,
I know. But like you said, there's lots of great pictures online of the old workings of what was people are very proud to work there, and the Diamond P, which we'll talk about in a little bit, was a very proud lapel pin to wear. There was famously photographs, even still to this day. That clock is still there. You can go in and get your picture taken under the clock if you want. But it seemed to be the place where employee or team portraits or photographs were taken every few years as well.
Yeah, the clock it's probably one of that building that the clock sits on, double face clock. You can see the second face from inside is the engine house number 5, where the steam engine, and that door is always locked. So you could never, I was never lucky enough to grab the handle, twist it, and think maybe someone forgot to lock the door. No one cared enough, I guess, up there at the time to leave it open or be in there. But that's probably one of the most preserved parts of John's Lane. It's beautiful in there. And if anyone does get the chance, by the way, you can just float in. There's security there, but generally you just tell them, I like Powers. They're like, yeah, go, you can go for a stroll. But the picture's always taken underneath. And another thing with the pictures was something special. The names were always on the back of the picture of who was pictured. So it could have been a picture of 2 Powers employees in Oilgate, or it could have been this here, but they always made sure to document the names of the employees. There was that kind of familiar, I guess, kind of familiar feeling.
There's some great pictures that surface every now and again, like the malting floors here inside John's Lane. But talking to Carol Quinn, the archivist, recently, and asking her about photographs and just generally the lack of photography around or photographic evidence or imagery around John's Lane and around Jameson's Bow Street distillery. And she had a very quick and fairly obvious response, I suppose, when I think about it, which was, they had no need to take pictures. What were they taking pictures for? This was just an industrial operation. Certainly cameras weren't as ubiquitous as they are today. But she said, aside from maybe an occasional, back when when the cameras were eventually available affordably, an occasional photograph for insurance purposes was all that you had. And you rarely had there would take a few pictures in here kind of thing,
Yeah. It's, I love, Carol is probably my favorite. I know we've got a lot of big personalities now across the whole in the community, etc. But Carol was always, I loved her. Number one, I loved her passion for Powers. She was always one that kind of kept the ember burning away. But I also loved her direct, delivery. And anytime I was ever lucky to have her at an event and stuff, she always was real. She was good to have with the bullies, She always kind of she shouldered that very well, and she's a good like a gatekeeper for the brand. And a trip through, I'll never forget my first walk into the archives with her. and we went through some of the pictures of the Powers, the old John's Lane stuff. Absolutely unbelievable stuff, really. Blow your mind as a whiskey fan, not necessarily just for Powers, but as a whiskey fan, it's mind blowing, really.
Absolutely is, and a very generous person with her time too. And Carol learned that I was fascinated with Powers. I remember going back now to 2019, so what's that, 4 years ago? She asked if I'd like to see some of the archives from Powers, and she invited me down. And I arrived in the archive, and the whole table was covered in pieces of archive from going all the way back 200 years, old John's Lane wage registers and old bottles and lapel pins and tickets to the RDS, to the shows that were taking place for their workers. Amazing what she has down there.
And everything had kind of a touch of class to it as well. Nothing was kind of, you couldn't help but feel stuff was just rushed through the press, really, for Powers. And that was kind of symbolic as to what everything they touched needed to have that kind of, I guess, as to use their own quote measure above. And you can see it on everything they did. There was one remarkable one, and it was, I think at the time they would have called them a bar card. It was almost POS of the day, and each of the countries that the POS was being sent to was marked across. You have them there on the right hand side, beautiful. And those bar cards were very Dublin proud, and the Sir John Power existed only on the ones that were leaving Ireland at the time, because if you were to use that kind of expression, that Sir in Ireland, you were probably kind of trying to step ahead of the rest. It probably wouldn't have seen as a very good move. But those cards were updated as John's Lane changed. If the paint color changed on the facade, those bar cards would have been called back and reprinted and redone to replicate exactly what was happening at the distillery. So, I mean, obviously, absolutely no shortage of pride of place, but no shortage of cash either. They obviously started doing really, really well on the world stage, and that reflected in the way they kind of did things too.
So they were making pot still whiskey almost exclusively in John's Lane, and that was the whiskey that went on to become the favorite worldwide. Powers John's Lane distillery in the heart of whiskey production in Dublin. Dublin itself, the epicenter of whiskey production globally in the early 1800s to mid 1800s. Anyway, the golden triangle of whiskey production in Dublin. Powers would have been one of the three. George Rowe, another. Jameson, the third. Would Powers have been one of the largest of the three? Do you have any recollection, or how did that triangle? How was that constructed?
It wasn't the largest. It was there was a different mentality around the whole George Rowe operation, which is obviously now back on the shelves again as Rowe and Co. Diageo, or I think they're doing a great job. The distillery up there is beautiful as well. But George Rowe, the different attitude towards it. Powers were always very protective of what they were producing. They wanted, quality meant everything to them. Where with the likes of George Rowe was kind of, stack them high, sell them cheap, if that makes sense. So they were really capitalizing on the demand for the whiskey, where Powers always kept very kind of, they were always very protective of what they were producing, because call a spade, they were sitting with, if you were having a champagne or you were having a fine brandy, if you were having an Irish whiskey, the chances are there was going to be a measure of Powers put in your glass.
Yes.
And like Three Swallow would have been kind of that, Three Swallows, where Jameson might have had the 3 stars represented that at least 7-year-old, and et cetera, et cetera. So I know that Powers 3 Swallow was kind of that whiskey that was reinvigorated to kind of, I guess, replicate what we would have been drinking in the pot still heyday for Powers.
And I want to talk about that whiskey in a second, as well as John's Lane, the relaunch John's Lane, Power John's Lane. But I want to touch on something that connected me with the brand and made me want to know more about them. And it was getting to understand the Powers family's approach to taking care of their employees, kind of a bit of social justice, maybe, understanding that they were building a big business that was reliant on human capital, and they needed to take care of the people that were working there, and they did. And it seems like there were generations and generations of people who worked for Powers because it was a job for life, and it was a job that you wanted your kids and your grandkids to maybe follow in your footsteps because you knew they were going to be taken care of. And there's so many stories of how the family took care of their employees. But there's one image that stands out to me always that whenever I share it, people are blown away by it. And it's this image here of the roof of the warehouse in one of the bonded warehouses right in the heart of Dublin, probably just off Thomas Street. And that's a flat roof on the bonded warehouse where the Powers family have added earth and allowed the workers to grow their own vegetables.
Yeah, so the soil would have been there as kind of temperature control.
Okay.
So that's the way it would have been used. Soil was obviously, it was perfect that, you know, the temperature kind of maintained and changed in speeds that would have controlled what was happening inside. But obviously, when all of your employees in the Johns Lane distillery are thinking agricultural wise and how to exploit the soil, like, remember as well that Powers taught these guys how to, you know, grow crops and effectively, efficiently, and kind of yield as much as they possibly could from their crops, that they were never going to say no when the employees asked, if we can get up there, how's about we we grow our own crops. And it's an interesting one because the Powers family, when they took their employees, and I know we'll probably touch on the Wexford connection as well, when they took them from Wexford, they could have easily sourced all of their workforce from Dublin and the surrounds easily. But instead, they looked at Wexford as people that really needed work, jobs. Ironically, it's probably the same now. You know, it's there's a lot of people that would desperately need it. But they took them to lodging houses. One main lodging house was 105 Thomas Street. That was their main kind of, call it digs. It's, if you would call it a modern day term. And there's an amazing picture of the rules of the lodging house. And there was curfews. There was, you know, you weren't to talk loud after 10 p.m. If your friend was in the pub after 10 p.m., you had to have an agreement before he went out that you would open the door to allow him back into the lodging house. But one particular item on the rules was that you were responsible to buy your own provisions and take your own provisions into the house, and the maid would cook them for you. So I would imagine that this was obviously a cost-saving measure, because these crops that were grown on top of the warehouses and stuff like that, they were going to grow them for free, and they were going to take them back, and the Bananchi, or the woman of the house, would cook these carrots, potatoes, etc. for you. But if you did something like this today, you'd be on the cover of every single cocktail magazine in the world. You know, this is modern day kind of innovation. It's sustainability at its finest, you know. But I was often asked what crops they were, and it was my father, God rest him, said they look like drills of spuds to him. That's what they look like. They look like drills of spuds. So I'd imagine that's what they were getting here. But it's, the more you look into it and you see what was grown, carrots, barley, etc., all of these different crops for bread making and all the rest of it was grown up there. So yeah, I love that picture. I think that's and one thing that people kind of pass by is the fact that they're in their absolute Sunday best up there as well. Yeah. Maybe it was part of the deal. Maybe they had to put on the 3-piece in order to get up there and go out. Amazing.
There's a great video that I'll share the link of in our Facebook community after the live stream ends tonight, and it's from Ireland's national broadcaster RTE, and it's an archive clip of about 7 minutes of footage from the. It says it's from 1977. I suspect it's a little bit before that, because 1977 Johns Lane would have been closed, but almost wound down completely. But it shows the workers in Johns Lane inside like the mash tun, and like shoveling out spent grain in their underwear, sweating, just like 3 or 4 men in their underwear, just like they're tighty whities and shovels, and they're shoveling out all the spent grain. And it's amazing 7 minutes of footage from back in the of what it would have been like, which was not like the distilleries of today. Like, it was a dirty, industrial, dangerous place to be, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there was absolutely no sign of, like you said, there was let alone safety boots. There wasn't even a sign of trousers or a shirt. They were really going at it. And I remember hearing the story of kind of even the coal, shoveling the coal into the hoppers for the stills. And that was the kind of the first job you got as your kind of entry level. It was nearly your initiation into John's Lane. You were sent to the coal pit to shovel coal for the day. And as I mentioned, like 5 or 6 tons, that was a really crappy job to get your hands on. And that video that you're talking about, they don't look like they're having a great time either.
No,
you know, they're not having a good time of it, but maybe they were just happy to be there, you know.
Happy to be employed, I'd say, in the 1960s and 70s in Ireland. You talked about Wexford, and Wexford in the southeast of Ireland played a big role in the story of Powers. The Powers family had a home in the village of Oilygate in Wexford, and played a big part, like you said, in helping the farmers in the area and the labourers either upskill or find work or have a better quality of life. There's a picture here of the Powers family in Oilygate, and Carol Quinn, the archivist, shared how maybe once a year there'd be a day where all of the workers were taken by train down to Oilygate for a day when they were taken care of on the grounds of the Powers estate, and they were fed and watered and served by the Powers family themselves, who you see kind of sitting on the steps there, who would have been a very wealthy, prestigious, royalty in Ireland at the time.
Yeah, it's a lovely. I know we certainly have a Wexford expert in the comment box there that doesn't live too far away from Oilygate, but I visited Oilygate. It was kind of in the area. Really lovely place. It's now owned by a guy called Pat Doyle, who is very kind of, if you're lucky enough to meet him, I think they were cutting grass the day that I went in there, and I was chatting to him, and he still would talk kind of about the Powers connection. I can't help but feel the place is probably full in there of like stuff that's worth an absolute fortune that has the diamond P on it. I didn't get inside the door, but I chatted to him. But yeah, the Oilygate connection goes back to 1838. But that kind of, I guess, significant event was where they were shipped down there, and this wasn't where a catering company was brought in to cook and make them cocktails all day. This was the Powers family were literally waiting hand and foot on them while they, played bowls in the garden. They barbecued, they got them drinks, they got them some lovely whiskey, I'm sure. And that's kind of one of the stories, the whole connection. I love them. It's very much about the people. When you read about the connection with Wexford, it becomes less about whiskey and becomes more about the people connection and the way they nurtured their workforce. And of course, big kind of salmon fishing area in the Slaney River. The Powers would have seen this in some articles I've seen written. Some people think of it as a holiday home. It actually wasn't. It was a full residence, and being so close to the salmon fishing that would have happened, that was contradictory to the distilling season. This is where Powers took their workforce from. So they would have seen these guys catching salmon in abundance and eating very well while the salmon run was on. But when the salmon were long gone, they also seen these people live in absolute, demise, absolute, atrocious situations. So this is where it came that not only did they take them to Dublin, put them up, give them jobs, subsidize their living, subsidize their food, but the community that was still left in Wexford, they were brought to the RDS, to the spring shows, the agricultural shows, to kind of, I guess, upskill and find out where agriculture was going and how they were going to, crop rotation as an example, etc. Like, I mean, I saw a voucher book from Powers, and it didn't just get you admission into the RDS. It got you your train ticket. It got you your breakfast and your first hot beverage when you got off the train in Dublin. It got you your transfer, your lunch, your dinner, and your train back. So it's just stories like this. Like you said, Barry, you could sit and tell these positive and lovely stories for a week. But I love that people connection and the way it moves almost away from whiskey when we talk about Wexford and what they did. It's a stunning story.
And Wexford, like you said, is better off because of it. And farmers who might have been farming the same way for generations were now getting access to new innovative approaches to farming that they learned at the agricultural shows, bringing that back to Wexford, which of course was then in turn, it helped the Powers family too, and it helped the farmers grow the grain, be it the barley or whatever they were growing, with oats or anything else. They now had a better approach to it, which was yeah, the Google of their day, taking care of their instead of the bean bags and the stock fridges of soft drinks, like it was up to the RDS.
It's unreal. Like, I mean, if you were to model it today, it would be like one of them good places to work. But it's I love that I love that whole side of it. It brought one questionable thing with it. It brought a kind of an unusual accent to the Liberties in Dublin. It was, these Wexford men meeting Dublin women from the Liberties, and kind of mixed things up there for a little while. The gene pool got rocks in the Liberties for a few years.
It wasn't all work, like you said, and it wasn't just whiskey. There's great stories of kind of family and community. There's also some good sporting stories because they had their own football team, Powers United.
Yeah,
not every distillery has their own football team.
Powers FC.
Powers FC, is it?
Yeah, again, an interesting kind of ties in, I guess, with what you're talking with they seem so ahead of their time with all of these kind of practices, and this was extracurricular. They got to train they were entered into leagues. There's one interesting report. If anyone uses Instagram and you go back far enough on the Powers Instagram, there's a match report where they played Dailies of Mullingar, where Powers came out on top and won 5-2. And there's a full match report of the people and all of the rest of it. But this, again, was something that unheard of, really, kind of a football team. This gave them some other avenue to kind of, I guess, when they were in Dublin working, gave them something else to think about. But like you said, not just all work. Interesting on the football as well. It's 1924 that's on the football.
Yeah.
But there's also the Diamond P on the football as well. It's like a modern day O'Neill's football, but it's got the Diamond P on there. And not only your players, but you also have management well turned out as well in the trenches and the hats and all of the rest of it. So yeah, it's endless, really. They don't look like they're up to much, but they're kind of. No. I hope this is before the game.
I know, yeah. They don't look very energetic. They might have had a drop of Potstill whiskey.
Possibly.
What does they do sometimes when you're training greyhounds? You put a bit of a poutine on the bottom of the soles of their feet so they run faster. Was there a bit of whiskey rubbed in the bottom of their soles? I wonder. The Diamond P that you mentioned there on the football, one of the earliest brands registered in Ireland, wasn't it? This Diamond P.
It was actually the first trademark ever registered in Ireland was the Diamond P. And anything I see from, like, it's funny, I have an old miniature here as well that I found a haul of them in a pub recently. They were for sale behind the bar and I bought them. But the Diamond P, even on the brooches and stuff like that, always appeared bigger. And the old lapel pin, you still can see that lovely kind of lapel pin today. You get them, the modern day one. The old ones were brass draped on a silk. Yeah, there we go. So it was kind of on silk. So now would have been worn out of the distillery on kind of big occasions where Powers would have represented the family name, St. Patrick's Day, kind of those big occasions around Dublin. But like you mentioned, always worn on the heart of the lapel. And this was like that old classic. If it's, if you worked for Powers, people knew because you told them you worked for Powers. And this was one kind of subtle way to do so. But nothing really escaped the Diamond P. And I know not to kind of go back to it and dwell on it, but this rebrand for Powers, which I love, is so fresh. It's modern. It's the first picture you shared with the new 4 bottles kind of teamed. I think the rye has really added to that green. Now, I had a heart attack when I saw it first because I thought Signature was back. I thought, here we go, lovely, we're back. It's not unfortunately, but yeah, nothing really escapes it. Even around the distillery itself, when you walk around the old John's Lane Distillery in CAD, it's almost like a game of Spot the Diamond P. It's just dipped. And I saw someone in the comments mentioned way back that there was no brand advertising outside the distillery, the fact that it was the John's Lane Distillery, it was very subtly done in the flagstones on the kind of, I guess, the gable of the NCAD. The diamond P was etched into the concrete, the eave gutters, and even the woodwork over the office doors and stuff like that. So nothing escaped. All of that old imagery that we see the diamond P everywhere. So it made perfect sense for Powers to move on something that was so quick, continuous, and consistent with the brand. Why would you not? And I personally, I love it. I think it's I was paid to love it for long enough, but I genuinely do love I love the new bottles. I think they're amazing.
The shape of the new bottle was inspired by the pot stills themselves. And here's a picture of the old pot stills in situ inside John's Lane. You've got the concrete, the brick base there for the coal underneath and the fire. But if you see the top of the bottle, it's not unlike the shape of the brick and the copper pot still.
Yeah, like it's unusual. The silhouette is almost that kind of same, that lovely swan neck on the neck of and the stills are really unusual as well. It's they're still there, you know, they exist. They're tarnished now, they're gone green with weather and stuff like that, but they would have been considered, they were bespoke designed for Powers, for the John's Lane Distillery. And this is what they would have contributed, the flavor profile, that kind of spiced honey, you know, that signature flavor profile to the unusual design of the stills. They came from Scotland, of course. They were Jack Turnbull and Grant designed stills. 35,000 litre. There was 5 stills at one stage in the still house up there. And I remember taking groups through, and they always asked, you know, were they exposed like this? Were they out in the open? They weren't. They were in a still house. There's a couple of pictures of them in their heyday, and they were just gleaming. The copper was always brushed and polished, and they were an unreal sight. And the brick, Barry, it's nice to mention that as well. That brickwork, those black bands that you see were spring loaded. So as that still heated up, it obviously breathed almost like a whiskey barrel. It kind of contracted in and out. And those bands had a great big spring on them to allow the brick to breathe and to kind of contract again. This was cutting edge at the time. Like, this was unseen, really, stills like this. And it was for that reason that not only did they need to have distillers, coopers, etc. on site, they also needed bricklayers and masons and all the rest of it to be there, because 24-hour operation, you have a blowout on something like one of these walls, they couldn't stop. You know, you needed someone on site. You couldn't wait for them to come from Cork or Belfast. You needed people on site to be ready to get to work and repair it.
And what a different time today. Like you mentioned, if you go there today in the middle of a week on a Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, it'll just be students leaning on the stills, having an old cigarette, not realizing the legacy that these and the contribution these stills had to the industry in Ireland for more than a century.
Yeah, judging by the smell in the air, it's sometimes a little bit stronger than cigarettes as well. I think. It's it is, and there's lovely views up there. I mean, it still is. It's a special place for sure.
Let's talk about 2 aspects of Powers that are fascinating to me. One, the name 3 Swallow, and the second is this miniature bottle that I got to put in my hand and didn't get to put in my pocket, but Carol Quinn shared with me in the archive. The baby Power, the first miniature bottle really of any kind of commercial size, was created by Powers in the late 1880s, wasn't it, or late 1800s?
Yeah, the one we're looking at here, and it's in the one I recently found a handful of these, like I said, in a pub on my travels. I was actually visiting Kilbeggan Distillery, and on my way back, stopped for some lunch, and they were selling these behind the bar. The baby Power has changed face, of course. The one I have here is probably, I'd say maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 back. Yeah. But this one that Carol has in the archives, I'd imagine, is a Mark 1 or Mark 2. I'd love to get my hands on it. But yeah, the first ever miniature bottled alcohol. I mean, and everyone everyone resonates with it. When we get on a flight, we're drinking the likes of a Bombay Sapphire, or we're having a Hennessy brandy. All of these brands, that trail was blazed by Powers. a brand that was producing some of the finest pot still. Obviously, you know, they cared about their workers, we kind of ticked that box. But the very fact that the workers couldn't afford to buy the product that they spent 10, 12 hours making during the day probably didn't sit very well with the Powers family. So by introducing a miniature, everybody could share in what they were making. So it's this one, a lovely corkscrew kind of hangs over the right hand side of the neck as well. But the effort that's gone into this one, it's absolutely unbelievable. It really is. That's a gorgeous one.
You see the words pot still whiskey on the label at the bottom, and yeah, the little presentation box. It's a work of art. I mean, there's whiskies released today that don't have this level of detail and attention.
And it's you know, everywhere you kind of like when I go to do tastings in the city, you know, you can throw a dart in Dublin city centre and you'll hit a piece of Powers history. You know, it could be a maturation warehouse, it could be an export bottling hall. But this idea, if we went for a cocktail in Idlewild, probably one of the better cocktail bars in the city at the moment, this is where the idea was dreamt up for the Baby Powers. It was the office, which is now Idlewild, the cocktail bar. And all of these places, what I like is they kind of pay homage to Powers, really. It could be a drink on the menu. It could be, you know, a display of Baby Powers, but they always kind of give a nod really to it. But such an awesome thing to have created, like that miniature. But not just a single measure either, or 50 ml, always the double measure with the Baby Powers.
I think that is is that the bottling hall? Is this where Idlewild is today?
It is. That's the market bar, yeah. So the red brick walls of the market bar. So the export bottling hall was on Drury Street or Drury Lane. And the one notable thing about this picture as well, while we're talking about kind of forward thinking and innovation, was the amount of female workforce that are up in the gallery there, or up on the top deck. And this again was a move kind of, I guess, far before its time. It's by bottling the first Dublin whiskey to bottle their own whiskey. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think 1889 kind of marked that first move into bottling their own alcohol. They still continue to supply the Publicans of Ireland with the white label, and the export would have been the gold label. So they kind of quality control that way. But by opening this bottling hall, you could now invite mum, sister, and auntie to work as well. So it wasn't unusual at the time that whole families actually worked for Powers. You could have had all the guys shoveling the coal up at John's Lane, and you know, all the rest of the family were down working hard in the bottling hall as well. So it's a lovely, really lovely picture as well.
A few of the bottles there on the left in this image show the different Powers gold label over the years. The one on the left hand side was when it was still pot still whiskey. You see the bottom label, the bottom very very low down label still says pot still whiskey, and then the whiskey to the right says gold label whiskey, which is presumably when it became a blended whiskey later on. But the name gold label itself, when do you have any understanding of when that was introduced, Derek?
When the gold label was,
like the gold label as a brand name, was a gold label always part of what Powers was producing? Do you know?
I'm not 100% sure on it, but I know like gold label kind of would have become the brand call. So it would have been, you know, the Diamond P or Three Swallow or Gold Label would have been the three different brand names that people would have called it in the bar, because obviously at that time in the heyday, adult literacy was an issue, you know. And if I wanted to meet you up in Fallon's or the Swan, Barry, for a drink, not only would we not be able to find the Swan unless there was a picture of the Swan outside, we wouldn't be able to drink Lovely Powers unless we knew it was, you know, Gold Label, etc. So I think what I would think was it almost became a brand call that ran us into it with having that gold label. The gin is super interesting as well. Like, I mean, there's still a few bottles of those hanging around. I see one or two kind of knocking around at auction. But the gin, a column still was introduced into John's Lane as well.
Yeah.
And Powers were one of the first distilleries of Dublin to accept the fact that maybe a column still was the right move to make, because everything pointed towards blended whiskey. Pot still was almost dead and buried at the time, and any sort of marketing that was done was showing that the consumer was looking for blended whiskey. We were kind of listening to trends, however they existed at that time. And obviously with this column still, grain whiskey, which was seen, you might as well have been looking at a bottle of gin or a bottle of vodka with grain whiskey, because they called it the silent spirit. Nobody knew what to call grain whiskey. What is this stuff? But gin and vodka were, gin 100%, we can see it. Vodka possibly was distilled as well. So I think they were kind of, I think it was important that Powers embraced the fact that blended whiskey was going to be the new kid on the block as well. Yeah. Whereas a lot of distilleries would have shunned it. They thought, nah, we're sticking true to our guns. But if everyone did what the rest of them did, we mightn't even be sitting here drinking whiskey now.
I know.
That's the reality of it.
And Eric Ryan, who leads the charge today on kind of both distilling and talking about Powers, shared the through line between the Powers rye today and that column still back in John's Lane. The idea that now you have a Powers whiskey, it's 100% column distilled on the market, and it does have a connection to the fact that back in the late 1950s, when they put in the column still in John's Lane, that they were experimental then and innovative then as they are now, which is again, despite different ownership, there's that nice through line.
Yeah, I listened to Eric and Laurie from Cork Whiskey talking on the podcast about the rye, because rye was after my time with them, and you kind of, as I said, you normally get a little bit of insight or whatever, but I knew that the rye wasn't going to come without some connection. It wasn't just going to be a strategic move to get a rye out there for popularity's sake or whatnot, but it's I think I love the rye. It's just a different thinking point for me. You don't have to, not overly complex, really, really nice whiskey to drink, sweet, easy, floral, delicate and light. But you can still kind of respect the Powers DNA in it as well.
I know.
We always talk about spice with Powers. We always kind of talk about that. So I think you've got it in your droves, and it's upset the apple cart. I love to see the new kind of the rye. I mean, you walk into Dublin now, you'd hit your head off an advertising for Powers. It's that kind of, that's where we're at. And I love to see that rye is part of that as well. It's great.
And in Times Square in Manhattan, you'll see ads for.
I believe so. I seen something. Yeah, I seen that. All right. Look great.
Good times. There's 500 stories we could talk about. We won't take much longer of your time, Derek, but there's a couple of stories I want to just touch on, and pieces of history which are very important, I think, to the development of Irish whiskey. One is the old Irish coffee and its introduction in 1943. And I think I remember chatting to you years ago about that. And while it wasn't officially kind of proclaimed anywhere that Powers was the original kind of, you said, I think you talked to them in Foynes and they said, no, it was definitely Powers. It was definitely Powers that was used in the first Irish coffee.
Yeah, I was in Foynes a couple of weeks ago. I always find it kind of hard to pass by I call her the queen of the Irish coffee, Margaret Shaughnessy. So she runs the visitor centre, which is now the museum of the old flying boat airport base in Foynes. And we went in there one day, and I always got questioned. I always love to include kind of Irish coffee. I love Irish coffee as a drink. I think it's great. One of the best hot cocktails you can do with the whiskey. But we always got questioned. No, it was the X brand or Y brand. It was this, and it was actually created in Temple Bar in Dublin in the old Dolphin Hotel, and this, that, and the other. So I said, if there's one woman that can set the record straight, it's Margaret Shaughnessy in Foynes. Yeah. So Foynes, obviously Joe Sheridan created the Irish coffee in Foynes, and the question always was around. There was two. It was who was the first person to enjoy the Irish coffee and taste it, and what whiskey was used. And the other misconception around it was that Joe Sheridan created it on the spot. He actually didn't. He was working towards the Irish coffee.
Okay.
And O'Regan was the owner of the cafe. He almost had the rent on the cafe and the
Yeah.
restaurant in Foynes. And his ethos around everything in the restaurant was everything must have eye appeal. So eye appeal was the big thing. When he made the first Irish coffee, he took it to the office into Regan and he tasted it. He loved the drink, but it was in a ceramic coffee cup, just a regular cup. And he said, doesn't have eye appeal. He said, go back to the drawing board. So the first Irish coffee was actually made in a wine glass, small wine glass. And the first person to drink it was a woman called Lel Dowling, who was hostess on the flight that turned around.
Okay.
That's the first person. So she knows the detail. So when she was telling me all this, I'm like, she's definitely not going to slip up on the whiskey here. She will be honest here.
Yeah.
And what we chatted about, the gold label, was the whiskey that was taken was noted in Foynes as the whiskey with the gold label was taken down to make the Irish coffee. So obviously everybody knew that the gold label as Powers. So the first whiskey that was used in the Irish coffee was Powers, and like what a drink he landed on as well.
Honestly.
Like it's unbelievable. And Foynes celebrated it going forward for years. I mean, all of the who's who, call them Irish celebrities if you will.
Yeah.
There was an event hosted in Foynes every year, the Irish Coffee Festival, where the World Irish Coffee Championships was held.
I competed in it. I entered into it years ago. In 1998, I was in it. I came second.
Way.
Maureen O'Hara was the judge.
Maureen O'Hara is right, spot on. Yeah, no way. That's I'll remember that story. I will tell people that the great Barry Chandler entered the Irish coffee.
I made a big mistake though. I was working in Adair Manor at the time, not too far away in Limerick, and they wanted an entry, and they said, right, Barry, we're putting you up for entering this contest. And so there's 3 or 4 of us went over there. But before we went over there, we had all these kind of plans of how we were going to be very elaborate with our coffee making. And They wanted me to like flambe or kind of light the whiskey on fire a little bit. They wanted a bit of a show. They wanted me to just quickly create a little blue flame and then kind of, waft it out so it doesn't burn off the alcohol. And so they put more focus into kind of training me at the time on how to light the whiskey on fire than they did anything else. So I remember when I sat in front of Maureen O'Hara and she's watching, and I'm making I've got my cream on standby. I've got my Powers, had my Powers Gold label. I poured it into the glass and I lit it. And before I had set that on fire, I was after whipping my cream on the side, ready to go, And I was so focused on not burning the place down that when I blew out the flame anyway, I never stirred my cream again. And so what had happened was it had separated from kind of the liquid to the solid. So as soon as I put the cream on top, sank to the bottom, and with it all the hopes and dreams of a life in Hollywood for me. So I didn't win.
Unreal. She still talks about it, and obviously at the time, Powers was kind of, I guess, huge, and it was absolutely everywhere. It was probably a focus, but that competition was it grew serious legs. It got pretty big. But I'd advise anybody to pop in and do they've got a beautiful kind of hologram exhibition. They reenact the actual scene of that night that the flight came back in. So you stand in a small gallery, they play this movie. It's kind of a hologram movie of Joe serving the first Irish coffee. It's stunning down there. Stunning.
I'm ashamed to say I've not been there, but I'm going to now make it a point to get there. That's
it's lovely. Yeah, it's a lovely thing to do. Yeah, definitely.
The last thing I want to touch on before we let you go to bed, and we'll continue this for a little bit, is the massive role that Powers played in the very survival of Irish whiskey. There's 200 years or 180 odd years of history leading up to the mid-1960s when Irish whiskey was on its knees. And there's a question came in the comments earlier, was there a big migration of workers from Dublin to Midleton when Midleton opened? And the answer is no, because there was very few people left working in Dublin at the time. And those that were probably went on to work in Fox and Geese, maybe the bottling plant, for example, that was part of the Powers. But the Irish whiskey in the 1960s was almost decimated. But the Powers family themselves and the leadership of Powers played a role in bringing together the three big companies, Powers, Jameson, and the Cork Distilleries Company. And there's a picture here from the Irish Independent in 1966, and it's a small little column on the right, merger, of three big distilling companies. And that small little column there is the foundation of the modern whiskey industry, isn't it? And Powers led that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because people, when I talk very passionately, I always kind of finish, like I said, on a Powers, and I've tasted some. I do some single cast tastings as well, where I'll finish with something great from the Palace, and I always kind of talk it up. It's obvious that I'm a little bit biased, no more than I am to Galway. I'm biased to Powers as my whiskey, but people always kind of wonder at the story, and I say Powers. Without Powers, this category could be extinct, which sounds really dramatic to people. They think, yeah, that sounds like a bit, but it's actually not that far away from what the actual was, really.
No.
So as these, I guess, three came together, you've got, the Cork distilleries, you've got Jameson, you've got Powers. They were, instead of continuing to compete for what was a non-existent market, they clubbed together to salvage a category, really, and kind of bring it back to where it was. But the whole thing, Powers almost set as a peacekeeper between Jameson and Murphy's or Cork distillers, because there was a lack of trust between one and the other, and everyone just seemed to trust that kind of Powers. They kind of thought, these guys we're going to use them as our mediator or our middleman to relay whatever messages we had between both. There's a really good podcast done by Middleton where Carol and a couple more talk about it, and it's talked in great detail. They literally go into the room where these discussions were being had, and the number one question is always, so if Powers has this such rich 232-year history, etc., why was not that the one to kind of go forward with and put up on that pedestal where I guess Jameson is seen to be now? And the issue around Powers was, with everything politically that was going on around the world in, Eastern Europe, Iron Curtain, etc., Powers would have been seen as too big of a statement. The name kind of was seen as, kind of that big, big powerful name coming through. And it was for that reason that I guess unselfishly Powers said, right, let's choose one to kind of go ahead with. And luckily they did. Obviously Jameson is fantastic as well. It's, it's kind of leading the charge really now at the minute for the US, etc. But I can't help but think, if the decision was made with Powers at the time, where it would be today, or what conversations would we be having around Powers now?
I know.
And because, it was the biggest selling whiskey in Ireland until 2012, remember, that's not that long ago, really. Yeah. But would we be saying that Powers is the biggest selling whiskey in the world, now, if a different decision had been made? But glad they did it. It's obviously, it was obviously kind of vital for the time. But yeah, I always dramatically say that Irish whiskey wouldn't exist if Powers never set between those two guys.
It's an incredible story, and you're right about that great podcast. It's called The Story of Irish Whiskey, which you can find on iTunes and Spotify, and it's a great kind of behind the scenes, to your point about the conversations that would have happened. A miraculous outcome where you had three competing companies and two of them deciding that they would abandon their brand homes. It would have been like removing a limb, that they left Dublin and said, you know what, for the sake of Irish whiskey and the future of our companies and the future of Irish whiskey, we'll go to Cork. And while Cork is great, that must have been a big push, like, to put on them at the time.
It is, and to see what's been created, and I still kind of like as well how Powers, it is very much, in my opinion, it's the Dublin whiskey. You cannot go anywhere in Dublin without being reminded that Powers kind of lived there. I mentioned Drury Street, and the underground car park in Drury Street was the old maturation warehouse. The Angels' share, believe it or not, still is on the walls of the underground car park. It's still there, like unreal history.
Yeah,
around the corner, the bottling hall, all the rest of it. But it's in Middleton. I think it does a great job of setting itself apart and kind of standing on its own as well. The distillate is so unique. It's that kind of, I think, in the whole portfolio, it's that spirit forward. I talk about the spice character a lot. They use that kind of soul distillate for Powers. And we've seen some unreal releases of single casks. I know you mentioned the Redbreast one, But some of the Power single cask recently, Carry Out Killarney, their single cask, the Palace Bar, a 16-year-old second fill bourbon single cask, really remarkable stuff as well coming. So I think they still have done a great job of hanging on to that kind of identity as well. So it's good. It's not lost for sure down there.
There's life in the old dog yet, and
100%, yeah.
The rebrand and now the introduction of Powers Rye gives us this lineup now of 4 different whiskies, and I think the refurbishment and the upgrading of the visitor centre in Middleton is going to pay new focus and new attention to Powers as well, which will be great to see. Hopefully the efforts that are being put in, the money that's been put behind the brand now allows more people to discover the stories and then discover the sips as well. Have you a favorite amongst the 4 there now of that lineup? If I was buying you a glass, which one am I buying you?
Do you know what? I find it so hard to pass by Three Swallow. I really do. I think it's like bang for buck. I just love what it does. It's kind of that, for me, it doesn't have to be a big, cask strength bomb or even at 46%. I think for me, it ticks every single box I want in a desert island whiskey, call it that if you will. Lovely desserty nose on it, like creme brulee, that lovely kind of spice, ginger cake. Really, really lovely nose. I think what I love is the kind of contrast with nose and taste, that kind of lovely desserty nose, but a spicy kind of honeyed orchard fruit palate. It's just a stunner. I think John's Lane is special, really, really special. But that's kind of the one I'd break out if, I haven't seen you in a while, Barry. We meet at Whiskey Live, maybe we're thinking, let's have one. But for me, if I'm having it, I always have a bottle of Three Swallow in the cabinet. Absolutely always. I love it.
I think the last time we had a Powers whiskey together was in Cork. I think it was in maybe the High B bar in Cork, if I remember correctly. Yeah,
it was. Yeah, it was. And followed by a handful more as well. But
sure, look, it has to be done.
We'll have one again soon for
we
sure.
Will,
yeah,
we will. 100%. We will.
Yeah.
And look, we could talk all night about Powers, and some folks in the audience will talk about Powers all night, which is good, and they'll share the stories with friends as well. And I know a lot of people have fallen in love with Powers thanks to the stories that people like yourself have come on and shared, and just when they've enjoyed the whiskey as well, tying them back to a personality and a place, I think adds to the experience and the enjoyment of whiskey. It's more than the liquid in the glass with Powers.
100%, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks a million, Derek, for coming on and joining us. I know it's late in Ireland, and there's more important things we're doing than talk about whiskey at 1 o'clock in the morning. But sure, look, maybe next time we'll do it a bit earlier. And I hope we can get to have a drink together soon.
Absolutely, we will 100%. Yeah, and thanks a million. Really appreciate it. Any opportunity I get to talk about Powers, I love it. I absolutely do. And it's kind of, I guess, new recruits we need for the brand to kind of go from strength to strength. So any opportunity, yeah. And
if you're going to Ireland and you want to participate in tastings that pop up around Dublin or book your own private tasting with Derek, Derek's website is up there, experienceirishwhiskey.ie, and you'll find all the details of Derek there. He's in our group, but he's on social media. You can find him and go find Experience Irish Whiskey, and hound him with questions of Powers and other whiskies. He'll happily answer them. So Derek, listen, thanks a million. You're a gent.
More than welcome, Barry. Thanks a million, guys. Enjoy the rest of your night. I hope you have another couple of drams lined up.
Derek, thanks a million. Sláinte. We'll see you later.
Cheers.
All the best.
Take care. Good night. All the best. Thanks a million.
Huge thanks to Derek for joining us. Great knowledge and passionate supporter of Irish whiskey and, of course, the Powers brand, and flew the flag for Powers around the world for many years. And so no better man to be able to regale us and tell us the stories of Powers. We'll move on from Powers to talk a little bit about some hotels and stays in Ireland. Before we do that, one last story from Powers that we didn't touch on, which is maybe central to tonight, is the story of the Three Swallows themselves on the front of every bottle, and the see if that can focus. Let me get a bit brighter here. You will see, of course, the Three Swallow. It's not Three Swallows, but Three Swallow without an S. It's also no apostrophe in the Powers. There used to be an apostrophe after the or, between the R and the S, but that apostrophe was taken away in 1966 when it was no longer the Powers family brand. It was a part of Irish Distillers. So the Three Swallow, there's a few different stories, but the one that tends to be most shared is that back in the 1800s, when the Powers family were moving from place to place, from party to party, dinner to dinner throughout the city, they were well known, and they were certainly part of Dublin's high society. They needed horses and carriages to take them from the distillery and from their homes to the parties and their other homes throughout the East Coast that they went to. They kept a stable of horses in John's Lane. They kept a team of workers whose job it was to maintain not just the carriages, but also take care of the horses. Whenever the Powers family went out, there would have always been 3 horsemen on the carriage. There would have been one sitting up front with the reins of the horses, and then 2 in the back facing out, looking to make sure that nobody comes and tries to attack the carriage, I suspect. But these carriages and horses would have been going out in all hours of the day and night, and all kinds of weather, rain and cold and sleet and snow, typically for Ireland, no sun. And it would have been cold work for the horsemen. So sitting on the horse and carriage, these horsemen were provided with a flask of Powers pot still whiskey, and they were told to stay warm, have a sip or a swallow each of the Powers. So 3 horsemen, 3 swallows of the pot still whiskey, enough to keep them warm, not too much so that they couldn't do their job. That's the story of the Powers 3 swallows. So if you're in a job that allows you to keep warm with a drop of Powers, more power to you. All righty. Let us move on. We're going to talk next about hotels. There's the last lineup of the Powers, last image there of the Powers. So the really quickly, I want to move through some hotels, but we won't be on for another hour at all. We'll just do another 10 or 15 minutes. But I want to touch on hotels and stays that are developing Irish whiskey experiences in Ireland. And the reason is the Irish whiskey industry is experiencing great growth. The reason that Derek can operate an Irish whiskey tasting company in Ireland now is testament to the fact that there's increased interest, there's increased number of brands and momentum in the marketplace for an industry to be built, an ancillary industry separate to distilling, an ancillary in the sense of tasting companies, tour companies, hotels, etc., travel. All these experiences can pop up now around Irish whiskey because there's enough interest out there, and hopefully, touch wood, that interest continues to grow. As that interest continues to grow, we're going to see more and more offerings. Hotels are starting to capitalize and really carve out a little niche for themselves and say, well, we too want to be part of this whiskey industry, and we want to offer things that combine a nice stay with maybe a nice dinner, a nice experience. And so we're starting to see some of those creep into the world of Irish whiskey and the world of hospitality in Ireland today. I'll be the first to say it's still very far behind Scotland. It's still very far behind Kentucky and Tennessee in terms of the experience industry with Irish whiskey. That's changing. We'll do our best to help with it. But for now, what we're seeing is the luxury hotels, the higher end of the market, are starting to first get in on this, whether it's with their own bottlings, whether it's with their own exclusive dinners with distillers, or whether it's packaging up stays with visits to the local distilleries. Some of them are exclusive behind the scenes. Others are fairly standard for a reduced price. You get your stay and a distillery visit at the same time. These handful of hotels I'll share now are the beginning of what I hope will be a list so long that in 2 or 3 years' time, we won't have the time to go through them all because there'll be so many experiences available to you if you're interested in Irish whiskey. So for now, I just want to touch on those that are embarking and kind of the pioneers on the hospitality side of Irish whiskey. And we'll come back and we'll talk about more of them as they arrive on the market. And I'm sure you'll share with me some hotels that you've stayed in Ireland that have been particularly interesting or have been conducive to a good whiskey experience as well. Oops. Just knocked out my microphone there. Always something with the microphone, these shebeens lately. I actually pressed the mute button. Can you imagine? So someone text him. All right. That was 30 seconds. You missed 30 seconds. I got you. All right. So we're going to start over. Back to the start of Powers. This is Adair Manor in Limerick. I don't think that's probably where I pressed the mute button. So Adair Manor is operating at the highest level of tourism in Ireland, of hospitality. This is where this is not just this is where I spent 3 years of my life training as a hotel manager and experiencing maybe the highest levels of service that set me on a career in the hospitality business. And it's there where I learned about Midleton Very Rare. It's where I learned about Irish whiskey first, back in the mid 1990s, late 1990s. And Adair Manor has been at the forefront in the last few years of experience tourism. It's not a cheap experience to stay at Adair Manor. You won't get it for $100. You won't get it for $200. And there'll be nights when you won't be able to stay there for $2,000 a night. But the reason I share it is because it's at the vanguard of Irish whiskey tourism and experience. And we want there to be these high profile, very high end experience or locations that are championing Irish whiskey, because they champion Irish whiskey to a market that can bring perhaps more dollars, more euros than a budget hotel can to the country. Condé Nast ranks Adair Manor as the world's #1 resort. It's that high of a rating for this location. If you ever get a chance to visit for afternoon tea or stay there, it's out of this world, extraordinary. 5 stars doesn't do it justice, I don't think. But they have released their own Midleton Very Rare whiskies over the last few years. 3 of them there with from both Brian Nation as master distiller and Kevin O'Gorman. Their most recent one was very, very recently, which I think is the one here in the middle. And these whiskies they sell out very quickly, but they're north of $1,500, maybe $2,000 a bottle. And they're very exclusive single cask releases from Midleton. But what Adair Manor does is it brings the likes of Kevin O'Gorman and the master distillers from the distilleries like Midleton to the hotel for exclusive dinners. For example, when they released their first Midleton Very Rare, they brought Barry Crockett and Brian Nation to the hotel for a night where you got a dinner with them all, overnight stay, left with a bottle. I wish I had the money to do it and to enjoy it at the time. It was an extraordinary experience, I'd imagine. But that's the level that they're operating at, and I expect to see many more releases from them. Adair Manor is the host of the Ryder Cup in 2027, so there's going to be more and more attention on this location. They have silent distillery bottles that are open. You can order, there's I think 160 different Irish whiskies behind the counter. They have an extraordinary setup. The tack room bar downstairs, many's the night I spent working behind that bar. I remember before Irish whiskey was as big as it is today, I remember serving a bunch of American senators in that bar, where one of them asked me how much was the most expensive bottle of wine in the bar. Now, this was about 2:00 in the morning. And I said, well, we haven't got many bottles in the bar, but we've got a wine list in the restaurant. And he said, bring me the wine list. So I brought down the wine list, and he found the bottle he wanted. It was a 1982 Chateau Petrus. And he said, we'll have that bottle. I said, it's 1,800 pounds at the time. It's probably about $2,500. And he said, that's no problem. He said, bring that down to us. And I brought the bottle down. I brought the whole case of wine, and there was a case of the Petrus. And I said, you can pick your bottle out of this. And I showed him the bottle, and I said, I'll bring glasses for everybody. He said, no, we're not going to drink it here. He said, just bring me a corkscrew. Can I keep the corkscrew? And I said, you can, yeah. And he took the bottle with him. Whether he drank it back in his room or not, I don't know. But the tack room bar is an underground kind of dungeon style, vaulted ceilings, beautiful location for whiskey drinking, with all kinds of whiskey tastings. You can have them create a whiskey tasting for you. So that's Adair Manor. It's a fantastic location, and worth checking out. Next up, I want to draw attention to one we can't miss out on, Bushmills Inn. Bushmills Inn is about 300 feet away from the Bushmills Distillery. Now, maybe a little bit more, maybe 1,000 feet away from the Bushmills Distillery. Certainly a 5-minute walk. And Bushmills Inn in the village of Bushmills in County Antrim is a fantastic location if you are touring the North Coast, if you're touring the Causeway Coast and the Glens of Antrim. Situate yourself there. Every morning you can have your porridge or your breakfast with a drop of Bushmills poured into your porridge. Happy days. Lovely food, great food. All of the Causeway Collection whiskies are there. Old Bushmills are behind the bar. So if you want to taste amazing Bushmills whiskies that are not available today, the Bushmills Inn is the place to go. It's the first place where I got to try the Bushmills Distillery Reserve, the Acacia Wood. I had for some reason, I didn't even know it existed. It had gone past me. Anyway, I tasted it there in the Bushmills Inn. So that's one to add to your list. It'll be a lot cheaper to stay at the Bushmills Inn than it will be to stay at Adair Manor. I can assure you of that, but it's worth checking out. When we were up at the Bushmills Inn, or up at Bushmills last month for the launch of the Causeway Distillery at Bushmills, a lot of the family, the ownership, the family that owns Bushmills and owns the Proximo brand and the Jose Cuervo brand, that family, the Beckmans, they stayed at the Bushmills Inn, and the tradition is that whichever nationality there is the most of staying in the hotel that night, they fly the flag over the Bushmills Inn. So they flew the Mexican flag over Bushmills for the Beckman family as they stayed to enjoy the opening and witness the opening of their new distillery, the Causeway Distillery, just a few weeks ago. Next up is a new addition to the world of Irish whiskey and a new addition to the world of luxury travel in Ireland. And again, many of these that we share tend to be on the higher end, mostly because they're the ones that have started embarking on experiences. Cashel Palace is a newly renovated 5-star hotel in County Tipperary at the foot of the Rock of Cashel in Tipperary. I know we've got lots of Tipperary fans and Tipperary people in our group, Kieran Quinn and Diarmuid O'Malley, to name but two. And Cashel Palace is a remarkable location and a stunning hotel. It's managed by a man who has launched many 5-star hotels in Ireland. His name is Adrian Bartels. He's the general manager. He launched Sheen Falls in Kenmare in County Kerry. He was responsible for what is the name of it? Is it Ardmore House Hotel in County Waterford, all 5-star locations. So he's well used to the 5-star world. In any case, what Cashel Palace are doing is they're teaming up with Midleton Distillery, and they're doing exclusive dinners with Kevin O'Gorman, who will come and host a tasting dinner of exclusive whiskies, maybe some cask samples. And I think that's a great example of where you don't necessarily have to go to the distillery to have a great whiskey experience. You might go to a hotel where they've partnered and they're collaborating with the distillery. I suspect the likes of Cashel Palace will have their own Midleton whiskey or something similar in the future as well. But that's one to put on your list, put on your itinerary when you're next visiting Ireland. Another one this will be more affordable than the first ones that we've shared, is the Hyatt Centric in Dublin. It was the home for us on our last whiskey bus visit to Dublin, tour in Ireland last August. Hyatt Centric, great location, right in the Liberties. It is about 500 feet from the gates of John's Lane Distillery. You walk across the road, follow that road, and the gates face you. It's 500 feet away. It's a great location, right in the heart of the Whiskey Triangle. You're around the corner from Teeling. You're around the corner from Dublin Liberties Distillery. We were able to walk to both of them from the Hyatt Centric. And let me see. Cutting out here. Oh, camera cut out there for a second. It's affordable. It's central. You can walk into Dublin City from there. You can walk to all of the distilleries, so it's worth checking out. They also do whiskey tastings, and they have a huge wall of whiskey history between the reception area and the elevators. So it's worth checking out. The Hyatt Centric in Dublin, and they don't have their own whiskey released, but they do. They are fantastically situated for a whiskey visit to Ireland. Down to Cork, Ballymaloe House in County Cork, which is a famous culinary destination in Ireland. They were the real flag flyers of slow food movement in Ireland. The Allen family, Myrtle Allen, Doreen Allen, very famous on television in Ireland back in the 1980s and 1990s. Doreen Allen, a real kind of a woman-led flag flying for Irish cuisine and growing your own food. They have a cookery school, they have a restaurant, a fantastic manor house to stay in, Ballymaloe House, well worth visiting. They are about a 20-minute drive from Midleton Distillery. So if you're situating yourself to visit Midleton, you could do worse than stay at Ballymaloe. They have a lovely outdoor pool in the summer, and right where that photograph is taken, behind you are our fields of barley, like the barley fields. I was there in August last year as the barley was being harvested, and it's a fantastic part of East Cork to visit. Ballymaloo House, really recommend it. Matt says he has her cookbook. Yeah, we grew up listening to Darina Allen. She had a TV program called Simply Delicious, and the cookbook, Simply Delicious cookbooks, went with it. And they have a fantastic cookery school as well. But why I mention them is that they do package deals where you'll stay with Ballymaloo, and they'll also include your ticket to visit the Midleton Distillery. So worth checking out, Ballymaloo House in County Cork. Staying in County Cork, between Ballymaloo and Midleton Distillery, is a resort called Castlemartyr Resort. This is probably one of the closest decent hotels to the Midleton Distillery without being in Cork City. It's east of Midleton, and Castlemartyr has a fantastic selection of whiskies. Again, this is a resort. It's high end. I think they just got a Michelin star for their new restaurant. It's just gone into new ownerships. There's a lot of investment being put into Castlemartyr. If such a thing interests you, it's where Kim Kardashian and Kanye West had their honeymoon, where nobody bothered them, because in Ireland we don't really care for celebrities, so you could just sit there and let them have a pint and they'd be happy. But don't judge the length of their marriage with the success of this hotel. In any case, it's well worth checking out. I've stayed there a few times, and it's a beautiful resort. Lovely walks around the grounds, through the forest. It's really spectacular. So Castlemartyr Resort, 12 minute drive from Midleton Distillery. Really worth checking out. And here's a new addition, which is Carton House in County Meath. The Carton House it's probably a 20-minute drive from Dublin, and they again I know Jason saying it's fancy. Can you direct me to the nearest Motel 6? I could give you a list of all the Airbnbs in Ireland, but they have nothing to do with whiskey. So really, what we're talking about now is those at the highest end are the ones that are either embarking on whiskey experiences are located close to the distilleries, but the high-end ones are certainly embarking on whiskey experiences, like Carton House in County Meath, another 4 to 5 star hotel outside of Dublin, 20-minute drive in County Meath. They've converted their old 2-story library, so a 2-floor library, into a 2-floor whiskey library. And of all the ones I've mentioned so far, this is the only one I haven't visited, but I'm going to go visit it because it sounds amazing. So it's hidden away through various secret panel doors that you have to push to get into it. But when you do, you're greeted with quite a display of Irish whiskies. So there are many experiences that are being worked on. I got word during the week. I put the call out to certain people and said, look, can you tell me what whiskey experiences exist in hotels right now? And the most of the things that were shared with me were things that are being planned but aren't yet in place. So the whiskey, the hotel industry and the tourism industry and the hospitality industry in Ireland generally is thinking about Irish whiskey in a big way. And so these few that I've shared tonight are kind of just a scattering of those that are out there right now, and only the beginning, I hope. And if you haven't spent all your money by now on the hotels that I've spoken about, well, you can take your last $2,000 or $3,000 and stay a night in Ashford Castle, the grounds of which were used for the filming of The Quiet Man in Cong in County Mayo. It is also the home of now today Ashford Castle 5-star Hotel, maybe one of the most spectacular locations in Ireland. It is just astonishing. Service, incredible. Many of the staff have been there for 20 plus years, and they remember their guests year after year after year. They too have their own Midleton Very Rare, which you'll see here. And you can have a drop of that in the bar. And it's an absolute stunning location. And maybe at some point we'll get to bring a whiskey bus there, but it's out of this world. It's kind of one of those once in a lifetime places to stay. And when you do, you'll just, sadly, after you stay there, life will never be the same again. But it's a stunning location. And look, if you want to get your castle in, you want to get your whiskey in, you want to get your beautiful lake, Loch Corrib there, which goes all the way down to Galway, it's all there for you, right in the banks of Loch Corrib. Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So look, those are just some of the stays I want to touch on. The reason we don't have an hour to spend on them, only because there's only a few of them right now worth highlighting. There are more coming, and I want to share them as they come. But for now, just know that there's a whiskey experience there's a whiskey tourism experience that is forming in Ireland. And we hope to play our role in that with Stories and Sips and with the Whiskey Bus and other ventures we're working on, which we'll share more with you in due course. And we've got some exciting things that we're working on that we hope that we can play a role in bringing people to Ireland as well to enjoy the hospitality and the craic and the whiskey along the way as well. Powers, if you just joined us, I know some people joined late. Great deep dive into Powers tonight from Derek King, and a former global brand ambassador for Powers and a whiskey enthusiast and expert himself. And I suspect that there's going to be more and more interest in the history and the stories of brands like Powers as more and more people get introduced to Irish whiskey. And if you missed the start of that tonight, you can go back and watch the replay when we're finished as well. I mentioned at the start of the night that we have a few club things to talk about. If you just joined us, I hope to be able to share our next Whiskey Club bottling very, very soon, hopefully in the next 10 days if I can. Logistics are everything here, right? We can't launch anything until we've got everything in place ready to go. Otherwise, it leads to more confusion and people missing out. And they say, well, you told me it was going to be available then, and it's not. So we always wait until everything's in place. The hope is that over the next 3 months, there'll be 3 different bottlings that'll come out, 3 different exclusive Whiskey Club releases. If you're not a member of our Whiskey Club, you can join anytime. storiesandsips.com/club. Just go to storiesandsips.com. You'll find the link. We have our next whiskey. It was a really exciting one. It's older than the age of the age you're allowed to drink in Ireland, which is 18. So it's older than that. It's older than 18. That's all I can tell you right now. Also, we had a great Meet the Maker event this week with Gavin Clifford, founder of one of Ireland's newest distilleries to be. It'll be a distillery in about 2 months' time. That is the Garden County Distillery in Wicklow. Great chat. We saw a video of him getting all his pieces of his distillery delivered out of the back of a truck. Really interesting, and a great passion story of individuals risking their time, their money, and their family's money and time on something that is their passion. So check that out. And also, we have another episode in our series, The Business of, or our Behind the Scenes series, which is interviews with independent distillery owners and brand owners who are doing interesting things, and we want to know how do they build their business, because I'm fascinated by it. I think some of you are too. That's on our website, storiesandsips.com. This is The Business of Puccine with Mickle Distillery in Galway and the founder, Padraig O'Greelish, chatting with Mark McLaughlin, who was kind enough to interview Padraig on our behalf. And we'll have a few more of those coming to you over the coming months as well. That is it for tonight, folks. I hope you enjoyed our Powers deep dive. I hope you enjoyed a little brief touch on the hotels. We will be back next week with more from Ireland, and we'll have more to talk about next week, because there will be, hopefully by that stage, an announcement on the new Redbreast Dream Cask. There will be an announcement on future Method and Madness releases. We'll have some more news for you on that. We'll have reports on how Whiskey Live is going for people, the big event happening next week in Ireland. So, as always, if you have any questions on Irish whiskey, throw them into our Facebook community, Irish Whiskey Fans of America. 10,100 people in there right now, having the crack, having the chats, and I have to dash off to another event. But thank you so much for joining tonight, and always thrilled to spend an hour or an hour and a half with you, sipping on a bit of Irish whiskey. And I hope to see some of you soon in person for a small drop of the good stuff. So until next week, thanks very much for joining the Shebeen, and we'll see you all very soon. So, slaunch everybody. Thanks a million. And click like button. Hit the like button and subscribe to our Stories and Sips channel. It's free. That's all we ask. Hit the like button. All right. Slauncha. Good night.